Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Arvind. I'm joined today by Steve. Steve, of course, needs no introduction. Someone who's been at the forefront of HR, HRTech, and HCM thought leadership for decades. So, Steve, this is going to be our second GenAI session come fireside chat. And of course, a lot has happened since we last spoke about it.
Oh, yes.
The euphoria and the I would also say even the implementation on ground has moved dramatically. If we look at the expectation, around a year back versus the penetration, I think no hype I've ever seen, of this kind. And then at the same time, everyone's so excited about implementing it and making the best use of it. But more than anything, Steve, one quick thought I just wanted you to help with was. Since we spoke, what do you think is the adoption on ground since you speak to so many leaders across? And what's your take on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, Arvind, before I answer that, I'll say it's great to see you again. And hopefully, like last year, I get to see you in person in India. So my take, I would say I divide into two parts. One is the more formal, based on research, not necessarily conducted by me, because as I've now reached 40 years in the industry, I get to let others do the research, formal research, that is. I do, let's say, more investigative, informal research at all the HR events I go to. And a lot of my former colleagues, when I worked in corporate HR, I get to speak to them an awful lot. So, like, for example, I'll be at Unleash, I'll be at HRTech conference, and I'm sure some of the audience will be there too. So I do get to speak to a lot of folks, but I'd rather cite the formal research by outfits like McKinsey and Accenture. And so I am pretty committed to doing as much of that reading as I can do. So I'll just kind of distill two recent research sets of research findings. Again, one from McKinsey, one from Accenture. I'll just distill it into, let's say, 4 tidbits. And the McKinsey ones are as follows. McKinsey and those of that ilk come up with terms. That's part of their brand, is to come up with terms. They came up with the term AI high performers. Now, AI high performers, it's really a fancy term for early adopters. Now, early adopters, as it turns out, and it's not going to be a revelation to anybody, early adopters on AI, as it turns out, are making up a disproportionate percentage of early adopters on GenAI. It's logical. Why is it so? Certainly, I can give you my perspective on that. And I'm sure some of the driving factors there are, it's really related to change management. And the front end of change management and business transformation is all about readiness for change, readiness for adopting new technology, and readiness kind of further breaks down into different components. An attitudinal component, obviously skills and competencies, what else is going on in the business, what's their previous experiences with handling change and thriving during periods of change. So I think that makes sense as to why early adopters of AI are becoming the yeoman percentage of early adopters of Gen AI. So that was one from McKinsey that I read. Another one which may give people some optimism here, particularly people that have been feeling there's going to be jobs displaced here. There's going to be people losing jobs. Well, guess what? That's not what McKinsey learned after hundreds of interviews. There might be some of that. But their concluding comment that I read was that Gen AI is likely, it's going to result in more employees being reskilled than exited or terminated. Reskilling is going to exceed the volume of exits because people are not a good match for the job. I think that's cause for optimism. Another point from McKinsey was, and you and I spoke about this only a couple of days ago, that when we talk about automation of a job function is not synonymous with automation of a role or automation of a job. It's a function of a job is going to be automated, and that probably plays into the second point I mentioned about probably more reskilling and upskilling than exits, so to speak. The one point from Accenture that kind of stuck with me was this notion of Gen AI powered reinvention. A number of the consulting firms are using the term reinvention. And I think the point they made was reinvention using Gen AI is really made possible by developing, it's only made possible by developing end-to-end business capabilities as opposed to function by function use cases. All right. And you and I have talked about that too. So end-to-end, cross-functional, totally business integrated use cases is when we're going to get into the territory of Gen AI powered reinvention. It's not, I'm going to do my recruiting use cases, then my learning, for the HR folks out there. We're not going to go function by function. We really should go end-to-end from the business standpoint. And that's going to really be a catalyst for connecting different parts of the business as well. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time with that, but those were 4 snippets that I found interesting.
No, very helpful, Steve, for sure. And as you touched upon some of the use case side of it, and of course, as you see, these use cases, more and more use cases, within HRTech as we start to see, unravel. One, which made me think was, say, for example, there are companies which you are trying to get, for that matter, job description, built up through, with the GenAI's help, with some of the prompts, it starts to get more mature and things like that. But I was even, trying to understand more, not just from a technology perspective, but more from a realistic world perspective, that would you not think that eventually this would start to make the practitioners more complacent? We would have more fabricated, JDs coming in, and things like that. So this definitely, worries me to an extent. So while I absolutely understand that everybody would want to leverage GenAI in general, but what do you think about the use cases and the adoptions, happening like this? Do you foresee some risk here?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would venture to say there's going to be some correlation between organizations that don't have big budgets for technology. There may be more complacency there. They're going to be relying on the technology a bit too much. In kind of an end-to-end basis. The companies that are leveraging AI and Gen AI that have, let's say, bigger budgets, or they're making a bigger commitments, maybe they deprioritize certain areas of the business because they really want to kind of load up on the advantages here. I think there'll be less complacency. There'll be more learning, and the learning will be human learning. It'll be learning the model. The model itself will be learning. You mentioned job descriptions. So I have spent a lot of time with HRTech vendors. Probably more than 60 have been my clients in the last 20 years. So I get to spend a lot of time with HRTech vendors. And the two kind of categories of use cases that I'm seeing for Gen AI now, you mentioned one, job description, or more broadly, generating content, generating images, right? The other one is commonly referred to as virtual assistants or co-pilots. But to zero in on your question about complacency with respect to job descriptions, maybe here's a couple of nuances. Let's say, if I think of a job description that's going to be fairly standardized and genericized across a large group of employees, what comes to mind? A call center with 300 employees. Jobs in a call center, there's not a lot of variability across those jobs. The skill set, it doesn't fluctuate that much. Maybe now with Gen AI, it'll be fluctuating a little bit more than it has in the past, because jobs are being redesigned, even call center jobs. But let me say this, where we have more things in flux, where we have more fluidity in terms of skills and jobs, that's not going to lend itself right off the bat to Gen AI, because it's going to take Gen AI more time. The model will need more time to learn the nuances of these jobs, of these skills. But where things are fairly stable, a salesperson role, I think the reliance should be there. The confidence should be there that Gen AI can be relied upon to generate content that doesn't require that much human validation. And I'm going to underscore, I would say for any organization that is getting involved, be prepared to have human validation and verification from the outset. And then as the testing proves out that the Gen AI model can be relied upon, the results can be relied upon, the human validation element can come down.
Yeah. But do you think, with the extra double checks and of the outputs and things like that, with the LM responses, and we putting down another layer to cross check that if it is accurate and things like that, do you think it is going to be scalable then?
Yeah, that's the magic question. Is it going to be scalable? It's not going to be scalable if every word has to be checked in a piece of content. Again, it's really going to depend on the situation. I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say, a new employee orientation package. Probably 80 to 90% of it is going to be standardized. So it's not one by one employee at a time. You can handle hundreds of employees with 90% of the same content. Another scenario which may not be totally obvious is, because I used to do a lot of work in the HR aspects of mergers and acquisitions. When there's a newly acquired company, the workforce of that company, they need to be communicated with quickly. Certain aspects need to be communicated right off the bat, certainly making them feel welcome, giving them a reason to feel connected to their new organization. Certain of those aspects, again, are fairly standard. Certainly just making them feel comfortable is a fairly standard message. But if you're going to get into each business area that may have some idiosyncratic concerns or aspects, then you're going to need more human involvement, and you're going to need somebody checking, the content results that are being emanated out of the model.
Yeah.
And hopefully that answers the question. I'm just.
It does. And only area, it takes me to is, the way I look at, the way LLMs work, on ground, ultimately, they fundamentally don't understand the underlying knowledge, behind the data, which is actually fed to the system. Instead, what they learn is how to connect those words. This is how they are fundamentally built up, So they are nothing but, I would rather say, learning the structure of the language. Okay. Mm-hmm. What they are, meant to do. So I'll give you an example. I was working for one of our clients, and we were trying to train something, and it responded in a completely unfamiliar language. In this case, it was Korean. All we were trying to do is we were trying to automate the recruitment calls, by using GenAI, of course, so the voice service as well as.
I'm smiling because I'm wondering if people on the team knew that it was Korean language. I wouldn't necessarily know that it was Korean.
Yeah, we could eventually figure it out, but yeah. But yeah, it was like completely bizarre. I said, from where did we go ahead and train anything like that? So yeah.
Yeah. If organizations are investing in Gen AI, frankly, no matter how much they're investing, they have to expect some surprises that are unpleasant surprises. It's part of the learning process when we learn anything. When humans learn, and when humans are learning something, there may be a few dozen variables or elements of what we're trying to learn. But when the Gen AI model was learning, there's hundreds or thousands of elements. So the likelihood of a mistake now and then is going to happen. And frankly, when an implementation is begun in an organization, that's part of the kind of the readiness process, is to let people know, don't have ridiculous, unrealistic expectations that right off the bat within the first week, this is just going to be breakthrough. It's going to take time. There's a cycle for the model to learn and for the organization to optimally calibrate what are the best use cases, where do we need to insert people in the process, etc.
Yeah, no, certainly. And if you recall, while we both were sort of working out what could be an ideal topic, that would help the world. We both were thinking through of two main aspects that, what could really be an ROI, when it comes down to GenAI. And then at the same time, if you recall, my thought was around that I was sharing my nervousness, not just the readiness from technology perspective, but more as my nervousness that, so while I'm implementing all of those different solutions for different companies, but where, I'm, nervous was around the security aspects, the confidentiality aspects, the code ownership or the any intellectual aspect that we as companies start to leverage AI. I feel this is a critical area, and how would actually be the best way to sort of leverage these tools without compromising things and compromising customers' data in particular. Yeah.
One of the items that you didn't mention there, but you mentioned it last time we spoke, was the cost element, right? And particularly hidden costs that were maybe a bit of a surprise, because some of them are at a very granular level. They're not totally visible until you're knee deep into the exercise. So if you don't mind me kind of reversing roles here, let me ask you, what were some of those cost elements that you came up with in the team in terms of the early implementations of Gen AI?
I would say several cost factors to consider for sure, as we are helping companies, dive into GenAI implementation, for their use cases. First and foremost, I would rather say focus on the inference cost in particular. Be aware about what kind of cost, that you're going to put there, which is more about every time you go ahead and ask something to an LLM, for it to generate a response, that's your inference cost that you got to think about. You got to take care of at least have a handle around the fine-tuning cost as well. This is where your pre-trained generative AI models are supposed to, focus on specific task or a domain. So I would say focus on that too. The next one I would rather say put in the line would probably be prompt engineering. This is where, for you to make your response, LLM responses more effective, you got to have that prompt engineering cost going in as well. So take into account that one. But the big one I would also say is the cloud expense. And be very familiar of what kind of use case you're managing. For example, if you are handling, a scenario of a medical situation, you'd rather not want to go with the public cloud because of the patient's data and things like that. So whether you got to choose the private cloud, very sensibly. And there are several ways in which one could, save those costs by looking at the right combinations of what you can go and what you cannot go for. More importantly, I would rather say this cost is, of course, very much there in CEO's mind, which is the talent cost in particular. Usually the practice is, hey, why not, build up a separate team around it and things like that. But interesting thing with GenAI is every engineer who's right now working on any technology can simply upgrade to GenAI, okay, and then make to start use of it and things like that. So you got to be careful about how you train your staff, in particularly at the organization level. You got to be aware about your operational cost as well, and then there are of course some hidden cost as well, Steve. For example, I would say infrastructure overhaul. You already have a certain architecture under which the whole product was developed, and now you're trying to adopt GenAI. So that means even that is likely to have some sort of modifications. The security for the data, that's also critical. So also got to take care of some extra measures. that you'll have to take care. You already covered up the point, for validation. So human validation is another aspect I would rather say. But let me just flip it and say not just what would actually be a good way for firms to rather, have a good handle on the cost in particular. What could be their strategic approach if I could share that? I would rather say most important, your decision making, of integrating GenAI. Please have a very clear, understanding of what all use cases you are touching. This will give you a good way to handle it because it's overwhelming. You want to do everything in GenAI, but you might not want to. You could pick up a very specific use case and see how you could integrate. Then please also ensure, just like how you typically do DevOps, please also have a good handle on the monitoring of the GenAI execution strategies on the ground. So if the cost monitoring could actually be in the number of cost factors which I suggested, if you can just keep an eye on each of that, I think it will be a good handle. Last and foremost, what I really feel is at the end of the day, we have learned in past, right? Who manages cost better? The one who understands better, right? So have your teams empowered well, your leadership empowered well, so that they have a learning for them to be able to take right decisions. So that's how I would put it in terms of cost. Yeah.
That's very, very helpful, and it's educational for me as well. One thought, and like to get your perspective on it. And I know you would agree with this. Cost, well, as important as cost is, it's really it's one component, right? Impact, you could argue, in many cases, should be even viewed as more important than cost. So you have to look at the different components. And when I used to many years ago run product strategy at PeopleSoft, and we came up with the product roadmap, when we prioritized the different areas of the product we wanted to invest in, we looked at the dimension of ability to execute. It wasn't just cost. It wasn't just impact. It was ability to execute, right? And the ramp up time needed to execute. If you don't mind, I want to go back. This is my kind of obsessive compulsive trait, I guess. But you mentioned prompt engineering. You did it. It's not a phrase a lot of people use. Maybe a lot of HR people use. Can you just elaborate a bit on what that is?
Yeah. So I will take the case of the job description, for example. So let's say we have gone ahead and implemented LLM, where what we would want to do is the recruiters or even the businesses, they are dynamically going ahead and building a job description. I'll give you a technical profile example. I'm trying to bring in, let's say, a senior Python engineer, and I want to go ahead and build the job description for it. Of course, the LLMs, the way they are trained right now, they would go ahead and do it. Okay. But then the new factors start to come in. I would say, hey, I want the engineers should also have the handle around the OOPS concepts. I want the engineers to have the handle around the cloud as well. So now idea is like the default job description that's you're gonna get from the LLMs is going to be still the standard answer, which it has learned, from several data. This is where the prompt engineering starts to come in. You just simply say, hey, ensure that the JD also covers up the knowledge around the clouds as well. We're comfortable with both AWS and Azure. This is where you prompted,
I see. So, right. Yeah. So I mean, the more aspects, even nuances, are considered and incorporated into the prompt, most likely the more complete the response will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could even take a look at example of how we humans, behave as well. Say, for example, if you want to say, walking into the room, these are the disciplines that one should maintain. So the moment it is said, then we start to go ahead and practice it. So it's very similar here. You go ahead and prompt it and set certain examples, behave like a sales engineer only or salesperson only. Then automatically you'll start to find that, LLM starts to behave in that way and things like that. So that's how, usage of prompt engineering could make, the overall responses way more effective.
Right. Even something so basic, but also highly relevant over the past couple of years and in the COVID era, so to speak, is all these people working from home. And you have organizations that are transitioning back to allow people to work, or maybe even request that they work out of an office because they need to be in close proximity to team members. that should be certainly part of the job description, and the candidates should know, and the candidates you're looking at should have the ability to come into the office, whatever percentage of the time. So that's an easy one to be included in the prompt. There may be others that are not as easy. If I recall correctly, I think you mentioned something about intellectual property. Can you remind me what you brought that up about concerns about IP infringement? Because I've done some research in that area too. You had a question about that, I believe.
Yeah, so I mean, what I meant was like, so one, in terms of the different implementations, one would rather want to go ahead and leverage some of these large language models. So that means, what we are doing is the surveys, run in the companies. This is private info, right? They are sharing. They are not happy with certain aspects of the company. These are private. This is private data, and you're trying to derive a sentiment out of it. Now you are leveraging an LLM to derive that sentiment for you. What's happening is you are passing in all of that survey data to a public operated firm that way, let's say, right? And your intellectual or sensitive information is going out. Yes, of course, there are options where you could go for a private implementation as well and things like that. But yeah, it does call for a fact that it is available and people do not want to make extra effort, let's say, to another technology costings. So they're trying to leverage the standard model, which is out there, but you're losing out on your private stuff for the firms. Yeah, this is what I was thinking, that it is going to be a problem area.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also extending it a little further in terms of the potential problem or risk, and it's the area of patents. It's the area of methodologies, ideas, that, if the right prompt engineering is occurring, you may be picking up on somebody else's intellectual property in terms of problems that they've solved before. And maybe they have a patent on it. Maybe they're known for that. And then you have brand infringement and all of that. So that caused me to do some research in terms of some of the legal cases that are being disputed in the last year. And I will kind of reduce it down to two words: derivative and transformative. So these are words that are being used in court these days when GenAI tech companies are being sued, and it's state by state jurisdiction, so it's not standardized across the U.S., for example. But derivative, so it's incumbent upon the company or the GenAI developer, it's incumbent upon them to prove that the methodologies, the frameworks, the IP that their model is generating is not directly derived from somebody else's model. That's the derivative part. And the other side of the coin is, even if there is a little bit of connection to the original model or IP, does it take it further? Is it transformative? Does it add value beyond what the original content or the original images and the value of those images? So those are two kind of magic words to think about for anybody that is concerned out there about winding up in court because they're infringing on others' ideas, methodologies, etc. It is just be able to defend that it is not closely derived from other IP, and even if it's slightly derived or a little bit derived, demonstrate that it takes it further, that it's transformative in nature.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think so. I would rather say there's still keeping in mind it's still early, I would rather say, in terms of its own implementation. So the whole, I would rather say, the software development and quality engineering, which is put on ground, the measures, our companies choose, I think that they're going to be very important. I would rather say one should be careful, how they are taking in, anything in development or implementation, for Gen AI. There are several factors, but yeah, I mean, I feel it's very important. Yeah.
And you also brought up the talent, the cost of talent. And of course, when we are, those of us in HR and even and anybody that's been managing people and having to resource a project or resource, an initiative in the company, you have different options. One of them is to upskill or reskill. You have another hire. You can contract with a contractor, but you could also outsource. And I have a feeling, and you and I spoke about this last week, that there'll be some large outsourcing companies that are getting involved here. And it's all relative, right? You're going to have outsourcing companies that have tens of thousands of employees, and you have outsourcing companies maybe more along the lines of an Azilen that has 300-400 employees. And this is not a commercial for Azilen, but I've been giving thought to what would be a competitive advantage of a company with 400 employees as opposed to 10,000 developers. I don't know if you want my thoughts on that, but what are your thoughts?
So I'll put it this way. I think, see, firstly, what I really feel on ground, Steve, is that any technology which is newly coming in, right? You'd usually find, within the organization that certain folks who are already upgraded, they ensure, they are well trained, their logical brains, ensure that, what is the right way to adopt it, what are the nuances of it and things like that. So if I could, if you allow me, what I'll probably, if I could just touch upon this and let me also answer the other aspect in terms of, the firms of our size, what and how, what do they do different and things like that. But first and foremost, I would rather say, GenAI in particular, if we continue this, topic, see, a new technology has come in. So many people would start to put down things that, hey, we know it and we want to go ahead and do it. But I would rather say this is all marketing, but beyond the point, if you want to, focus on the three core areas in terms of, you implementing it right, is that first and foremost, GenAI is, or AI rather, I would rather say it has more to do with harnessing the data. You must know your data well. You must have an insight of what you could do with your data. I think, that's the most powerful thing. Your ideas are only going to come from the data that you're holding, because from there the value adds will start to happen. It is going to give birth to some new use cases which you have never imagined 10 years back. Next one is, as you finish your implementation, we got to have a very rigorous verification and a testing strategy implemented for it, because the real world is going to use it's not a proof of concepts that we are trying to build in. So this is an extremely important step. Third, and the most powerful, I would rather say, is the mindset. Right now, how I see it is like everyone wants to go ahead and leverage GenAI. Yeah, that is absolutely fine, but you got to understand that with the right mindset, you would actually derive a sensible use case which is going to go ahead and make a difference. You do not want to bring in technology just for the sake of it because it's popular, it is picked a hype and things like that. And for you to able to do that, one thing which has been my own learning, I would say, is not to have the teams built up in silos, right? For GenAI, new technology coming in, build a team in silo. I would say that's not the ideal way. GenAI is a technology which I would rather say should actually be adopted by all of your engineers, all of the senior folks as well, because it's in the mindset, that you got to first bring in, and via which they'll start to help the different companies, either in the form of consulting or engineering or deployment or integration, because these are 4 different areas in which they would go ahead and start to come in. GenAI is one bigger problem, as I often hear from everyone, is that, hey, where all we could start to go ahead and use GenAI, or this large language models. So I would rather say we got to understand there are few things it can do. For example, it can do content generation, it can do summarization, it can do insight extraction, it can do classification, it can retrieve, and help you with the augmented generation, or named entity cognition as well. So I'm saying anything with regard to the text as a data, it's very well learned, a largest model that you can think about, with GPT-4 and things like that. So this is your core area which you're supposed to focus. Now you have got your data. Now realize what you want to, how best you want to go ahead and utilize. So in terms of your implementation, again, think well. You want to go for a SaaS, you want to go for prompt engineering, you want to go for fine tuning. Be very clear what option you choose. Be very clear with regard to your use case, and also, of course, try look at it if it is fit for purpose. Ensure you're taking care of the security and the governance aspect of it as well. Very important, how you embed GenAI into your existing code, because eventually that's what is the overall product. And of course, as you all have heard about different microservices here and there, so this is going to be a separate service. You just got to put it that way. So just think about that. Deployment is a major factor, I would rather say, in your architecting, how you're going to deploy. Please keep that aspect very clear right in the beginning itself. I would say smaller such steps right in the beginning will help firms, get a better handle on how to go for GenAI implementation in particular. Now, coming down to the question which you asked, Steve, is that firms like ours or similar outsourcing firms, what they're going to do. The core at which we operate, for that matter, engineering is the core. Now, for that to happen, we know there's something new which has come out in the market. It is going to make a difference in people's lives, right? So we got to be the early adopters of it. We got to be the ones who should go ahead and consult and guide and things like that. I feel firms of this size and firms with the right mindset, I would rather say, who have this edge and are very clear that how they want to go ahead and help. Eventually, everyone is striving to start to get better either with the product or with the services, right? But I think one should probably go for firms who are sharp in engineering, who are there for value adds in particular, and not just an outsourcing player. So that's how I would put it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the only thing I would say, or maybe reinforce, amplify your point about vertical versus horizontal organizations. I think that's a critical point. With a whole new door opening up in terms of learning opportunities, studies have shown time and time again that when you have teams that are not in silos, when you have diverse teams, diverse from the standpoint of the roles, the skill levels, the projects they're working on, then you have a lot of, let's say, cross-pollination of the learning process, as opposed to perhaps, there's very credible outsourcing companies out there with many thousands of developers that they're exposing to GenAI. But it's much more common to see a more vertical as opposed to a horizontal structure when you get to be a very large organization.
No, absolutely. And I would also say, keeping in mind the viewpoint that we both are discussing right now, it does bring me to a fact that for example, yes, there are giants who are already trying to adopt GenAI. They're taking their own sweet time and things like that. And then there are players who are quickly coming in with very small but powerful tools and things like that. So do you think that they'll be left behind just in case, comparing to these nimble innovators which are out there in the market to prove, something or the other? But so what's your thought there?
I get where you're going with that. My answer is very simply, and nobody probably would be shocked by the answer. The ideal situation is when you have a large organization with a lot of capabilities that acts like a small, nimble organization. But how many very large organizations act like a small, nimble organization? It's a little bit of a rarity. And when you have everybody, all the techies and the developers with a hunger to get to get involved in different projects. The other thing is with in my travels, I would say larger consultancies, larger outsourcing firms, they tend to specialize in different industry verticals. If you're going to specialize in an industry vertical, you're going to be an expert and know a lot more about that vertical. You'll know less about other verticals. And it's one again, and again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it's the advantage of being horizontal in the go-to-market business model and being horizontal in the team and the organizational design and how you're availing your team to learning as much as possible. The more horizontal you are, the better. There is a correlation where very large organizations tend to be a bit more siloed. So for the buyers and customers out there, if you could find very large global organizations where you don't see a lot of evidence of verticalization or siloed thinking or structure, yeah, go for it. In my travels, I haven't seen that many.
Yeah, sure. Steve, I'm also conscious of time, so let me take one last question for you. And before we go for our third fireside chat, in some time, if you look at, let's say, next few months or a couple of quarters, how do you see GenAI in particular in the HRTech side of the world in terms of its implementations? What could be one top advice, let's say, that you would want to give it to the HRTech folks who are trying to implement GenAI?
Thanks. If you look at that question in the context, a broader context, let's say about any type of business transformation, or even more relevant, let's say a digital transformation, right? The studies, I mean, they're out there. Do a Google search, percentage of digital transformations that are successful. It's not a pretty picture. Implementing GenAI and integrating it and infusing your operations with GenAI, it is the epitome of a digital transformation. So, the last numbers I saw, I think it was Gartner, McKinsey, others were saying that 70+% of those large-scale transformations underperform or fail. And what is missing? What is missing is what I said earlier. I'm a big proponent of understanding the aspects of organizational readiness, attitudes. What else is going on in the organization? What's the previous history with transformations and digital transformations? Do you have the mindset, to use your word? Do you have the skills? Do you have the people? And again, do you have an approach to prioritizing use cases and applications? And are you setting realistic expectations as to what you're going to get in the first trimester or whatever? So, if you want to not be in that group of 70% plus who are not pleased with the transformation, digital transformation that may be centered around GenAI, then think about readiness, organizational readiness, change management readiness. That's my tip. I've been a major advocate of assessing change readiness really my whole career, and it's helped me.
No, thank you so much, Steve. I think I think this sums up in particular, the advice that you put across. I think for sure, going to be helpful. Also going to be helpful for me too, I would rather say, because as the queries come in, different companies are reaching out with some use cases, some not, very much ready, on what they want to go ahead and implement, and they're looking for ideas from us and things like that. But yeah, all said and done, I think it's going to be a close exercise, as you rightly said. It's going to be the mindset, team building, the cost aspect, so many factors out I see, which will ensure that, people are able to leverage GenAI in the most, appropriate way in next few decades.
No doubt. I mean, it's something that it's like a fortune cookie sort of statement, but I've learned in my lifetime that, let's say in the context of an organization, or even in your personal life, the biggest, most impactful outcomes typically come from a process that's not easy. It's an arduous process. And that's part of the mindset that you need to approach this. I'm not trying to scare people off. I'm trying to do my part, as you are, in getting people to approach this, with that right frame of mind. There are no magic bullets, but this is a huge breakthrough in the world of technology. So just approach it in the right way.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you again for all the insights. And yeah, I look forward to another chat with you very soon. And yeah, hope to see you in US very soon as well.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Steve.
Arvind. Take care. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye bye.